Venturing the vintage watch world, you will inadvertently come across these odd watches. Mechanical movement inside, but with an almost digital display featuring abruptly changing digits, for the hours at least, like the opposite of an Ana-Digi watch. Even though it remained almost entirely a part of the vintage watch world, it has always been a visually appealing concept. The Jump Hour watch. Within these few minutes, I will give you a short recap about the Jump Hour design in general, Oberon as a brand itself, and the watch right here in all details, right down to its interesting alternative concept of an escapement inside, which quite clearly cheated with its jewel count. Let's jump right in. Jump Hour watches go back way longer than I expected. The first recorded specimen was made for King Louis-Philippe I of France by the watchmaker Antoine Blondeau in the early 19th century. But the concept got traction with the first patent in 1883 by an Austrian engineer, Josef Pallweber, for a pocket watch movement, and especially so when IWC and Cortebert acquired a license and sold a few hundred afterwards. The design idea lay dormant for several decades, with a few minor lucid moments in the post-World War I era. But the wake-up call came in the 70s. The advent of quartz movements and digital watches, which were relatively expensive then, inspired the more traditional mechanical watch manufacturers to look back at this near-digital way of telling the time and offer a less pricey alternative. Thus, the Jump Hour became a mass phenomenon, and different variations saw the light of day, some trying to mimic a LCD-style arrangement of numerals, while others just went with a more traditional wristwatch template, and also everything in between. Nowadays, they are an oddity, but can be found in a few instances at famous brands like A. Lange & Söhne, IWC, Christopher Ward, Chrono Swiss, or more micro-brandish, for example by Reservoir Watches, Isotope and Mr. Jones. One of my favorites are the Bulgari or Gerald Genta bi-retro ones, which hark back to the early 2000s, as well as to the DNA from his 80s Gefica models. Anyway, let's take a few steps back for a minute. Oberon itself might be unfamiliar, but it was registered in 1951, not to be confused with some more modern watches using Oberon as their model names, for example Storm or NTH Oberon II, which are probably referring to a class of British submarines named Oberon. The Oberon brand remained in the books until 2002 as a watch company, but it basically fell silent already in the 70s, with the last known watches powered by the Valjoux 7734 instead of their self-branded movements like in this watch. A shame, but there's the possibility that they just continued providing movements to other companies from the shadows, so to speak, since Oberon movements could also be found in other watches in the 60s like Puerta or Binatone, although equally or even less well known. Let's focus on this Oberon Jump Hour in particular. Supposedly a child from the 50s and 60s, it stems from a time of general Jump Hour slumber. Yet it is thus clearly distinguishable from the 70s era when mimicking electronic watches was the bandwagon to jump on. Hence it features a classical round dial design in a brushed tonneau case with polished sides, coming in at 36.5mm diameter without the crown. But the tonneau case features a 42.5mm from top to bottom with the hidden lugs, which makes it wear bigger and fit for a modern wrist, more so than the diameter might convey. A beautifully domed acrylic crystal on top brings about 30mm in total height for the watch at a very low total weight of 65 grams. No need to talk about water resistance with this simple non-screw-down crown and chrome-plated brass case. You can already see the downsides of this case material right here. Only the screw-in case back comes in stainless steel and boasts about its shock protection, which was definitely not standard for this movement at that time, but more on that later. It was also available in another case and slightly different dial design, featuring a water-protected claim there. Speaking of which, the dial is what makes this watch so interesting. I would call it a champagne sunburst dial with a fine railroad minute track around it. Most of the dial sits empty or bears some small descriptions here and there except for the 3 framed cutouts, 2 trapezoidal ones for date and the terming jump hour, with a 24-hour disc by the way, and a quarter circular window for the minutes, which is barely graced by the lollipop seconds hand. It's such a symmetrical look, which makes it almost jarring that the date window cuts into the minute track, even though there is so much empty space on the dial. But it all makes sense when you think in terms of disc alignment in the background. A lovely, clean, gentlemanly look overall. Additionally, there were similar models under other brand names like Lucerne or Endura, which sometimes featured a non-jump hour or continuously rotating hour disc, which can highlight half hours by showing the continuous transition more like a traditional watch. The similar looking watches were housing almost identical movements, because under the hood, a simple and quite loudly ticking pin lever or so-called Roskopf movement, after German watchmaker Georges Frédéric Roskopf, fulfills its duty. A cheaper, less accurate escapement than the lever version you are probably used to from modern watches. In this instance, it is a BFG 866, named after the initials of Baumgartner Frères Genève, who were founded in 1923 in Grenchen, Switzerland, and ceased operations in 1981. Most pin lever debauchery went under in the quartz crisis, so surviving until 1981 was basically already an achievement. They were known for very simple, somewhat reliable, and affordable movements such as this one. Oddly enough, it should feature just one jewel, but boldly proclaims 21 on the dial. This is a phenomenon not exclusively to Baumgartner movements or Oberon, but was common practice among many movements in that era. To be frank, useless jewels were added, sometimes just glued to the base plate to inflate the jewel count and suggest a higher accuracy and quality to the unaware customer. Hilarious and a bit aggravating at the same time, but comprehensible given the fact that jewel count was and still is a very common metric in the watch world today. As a side note, this movement has a rather uncommon shock absorption system. Anyways, a simple pin-pallet movement is an affordable treat for anyone looking for a historic and completely different approach to handling the escapement, in contrast to the well-known horizontal lever concept. And if we talk about affordability, you must consider that the cheap initial price in the low 3 digits range comes at a bit of a downturn. These movements might be simple, but in this case, simple means intensive on the maintenance side, I would say, as they wear out quite easily and are practically always yearning for the next cleaning and oiling cycle. This one here already drops 2 minutes a day, albeit measured with a phone app, with a service just 2 years ago. But don't get me wrong, I think it is very cool nonetheless, and definitely one of those watches where I care more about style and history than actual accuracy. Oh, and if you like exploring the crazy world of jump hour watches even more, check out the Jump Hour King on Instagram. The handle is well deserved, and he probably has the most complete overview of what is out there. Hope you enjoyed this hop into vintage jump hour pin-pallet watches. Thanks to each and everyone who ventures with me into the weird and wonderful of the vintage watch world. I appreciate your support. See you in the next one on the TiMEworn channel. Oh, and also, if you like, check out my shirts. Bye.